Hello, everyone, and welcome to Full Hands In, Full Hands Out. This session is called Negotiate Like a Pro, presented by Lush Life and sponsored by our amazing friends at Brown Forman, who I am so fortunate to get to work with regularly. They do such incredible work, and we're going to show you a little bit of what they do. Before we talk to my friend and expert on negotiation, Ciara Pressler, who I will introduce you to in just 2 minutes. But before we do that, I want to show you a little bit of what Brown Forman did at Tales of the Cocktail this last year. At this past summer's Tales of the Cocktail Festival in New Orleans, Brown Forman's trade advocacy department teamed up with its global alcohol responsibility team to launch its Pause campaign to the world's best hospitality professionals. Brown Forman's Pause campaign is about empowering mindful choices around beverage alcohol. Instead of saying no, Pause is meant to encourage hospitality's finest to take a moment to reflect on what next step is best for them. Sometimes that's a well-crafted cocktail sipped in good company, and other times that's a low or no alcohol option to nourish the mind and body. We'll kick off today's chat with the short introduction video that I mentioned before, just to show you what the Pause campaign's all about. And its goals are directly aligned with what Tales of the Cocktail is doing here with Full Hands In, Full Hands Out. So it makes a whole lot of sense. So let's take a little look at what Brown Forman did at Tales of the Cocktail this year.
This week, Brown Forman is at the 20th anniversary of Tales of the Cocktail. We have come to put on different events for bartenders, different seminars for bartenders, and we've also come as a responsibility organization to speak to bartenders about how they can pause and really choose what's best for them.
We've seen so much more in the ways of safe bar trainings. We've seen so much more in the ways of making sure that events have responsibility measures built in.
Alcohol-free options at the bar, ensuring that there's plenty of access to food, water, making sure that safe rides are accessible.
There's a desire to create these spaces. There's a desire to learn about how to have lower ABV cocktails integrated into your menu.
The second that they appear on a menu the same way other drinks do, I think it just really kind of like helps cement and familiarize these efforts for a lot more people.
And for a lot of reasons, it's a much better business case. The person who is taking that pause is more likely to buy a high-end spirit like a Brown Forman product versus a low-end spirit.
And I think from like the bartender standpoint, it is really a show of talent if they can create a no-proof drink that isn't just kind of like citrus or soda-based.
So having an interesting, well-crafted, alcohol-free cocktail available for people, they can still seamlessly enjoy the experience.
We're in kind of this interesting place with consumers where we're seeing more and more people say, well, I want to drink something that's better for me. I'd rather drink something that has a little less alcohol. I'm trying to take care of myself.
We're talking about mental health a lot more. We're talking about just the choice to not have to drink tonight. You can be sober curious, you can be sober, you can be just choosing not to drink at this moment.
And I think Brown Forman has taken a lead in this, in that helping people drink responsibly means you'll develop a better clientele and more faithful guest.
So it's a net positive for all of us, for the marketers, for the sales teams, for the bartenders. Everybody wins when we treat folks the right way.
Well, that was just a beautiful group of humans. I'm so proud that we get to work with people like Leah and Jordan, who are leading the way in this conversation and who also support programs like the one that you get to be a part of today. And that brings me right to what we're talking about, negotiating like a pro. I am so excited to introduce all of you to Ciara Pressler, who is the founder of Pregame and the author of Game Plan: Achieve Your Goals in Life, Career, and Business. I got to meet Ciara because of our work at Portland Cocktail Week, and she is a thought leader in all things negotiation, how to really take that next step in your career. I got to meet her through that, and I'm so glad to introduce her to you now. Take it from here, Ciara. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, I want to help you all get what you want, but in a win-win situation. So yeah, my company Pregame, we do a lot of training for people on professional skills, but especially entrepreneurship. And so much of trying to sell people on a new idea is negotiating with them. And so I really believe that all the best deals, kind of like in that Brown Forman video, are where everybody wins. And so I think we can take a better attitude toward negotiation and get better results for yourself and for other people too.
Absolutely. I think in our business, we so often are focused on the people on the other side of the bar that we very often don't think about ourselves. And I think that's sort of inherent in a lot of hospitality thinking and a lot of the hospitality professional mentality. How do we sort of break out of that and start thinking like a negotiator versus like a bartender or somebody who's there to serve?
Yeah, I mean, well, first let's break apart like the idea of being a negotiator, right? Because I think that sounds really intimidating if people are like, I'm a people person. I became a bartender. I got into hospitality because I want to serve people. And negotiating is like, it sounds like manipulating them to get what I want. And I don't think it's that at all. I think the best bartenders are consultants, right? You're educating people on what they might like, what might be better than what they've had before. And I think negotiation is the same exact thing. You're educating people on what the whole landscape looks like and helping them come to a better decision that of course is going to benefit you, but will benefit them too.
Absolutely. Let's start with like types of negotiation. Where are places where negotiation you see happening the most in hospitality?
Yeah. So of course, first of all, it's your job. It's the terms of your job. And if you started out in hospitality early on, like I did, I was a server and then I was a bartender in Manhattan. And, it didn't even occur to me that I could negotiate things. But then as you go, you're negotiating like your shifts, your hours, maybe like getting that promotion. But if there's other opportunities, you might be negotiating other things. So it could be negotiating with a brand, with the terms of appearing at an event. If you are an owner or operator of a venue like a bar or a restaurant, I mean, negotiations with vendors, with customers, with realtors, you might have an attorney behind you, but probably isn't worth it to involve an attorney in every single negotiation. And it can work against you to involve an attorney because it might, feel too serious for what you're trying to negotiate. So, again, I think, whether it's money negotiation or money's not at play, there's plenty of things to negotiate that don't involve money. Finding a way for everyone to win is just, if you remember nothing else, that's what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about negotiation and like all of the different ways that it sort of presents itself in hospitality, are there any places where, or are there any styles of negotiation that you think work best in a more casual environment versus some of the maybe more structured environments where we would be bringing in lawyers and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, of course, it's almost like the visual of being across the table from somebody versus on the same side of the table. And you can literally use that. It's a communications concept called proxemics. Like if you want the other person to feel like you're on their team, don't sit across the table from them, sit on the side. So you're at 90-degree angles, or, don't be across the bar, come along the side of them and help them read the menu. I think we all do that naturally and we know those things, but there's actually science to that working. So think about the ways you can kind of be alongside somebody versus in opposition to them, both, physically, but also mentally as you're going about the negotiation. And then, the biggest thing is like, start from the facts. Because a lot of times in negotiation, we're trying to change somebody's beliefs. This is the same for marketing, right? Marketing and sales are forms of negotiation. So if you're trying to change somebody's actual like belief system, that's not going to work. You want to start with facts that are common beliefs and then build on that. So let me think of an example because that sounds very theoretical. If somebody believes that like vodka is the very best liquor, don't try to change their mind. Like, try to one up them. Like, oh, you like vodka? You might really enjoy this because it has a vodka kind of thing going on. So you
Yeah.
don't have to say, no, you're wrong. You can kind of yes and them, but redirect. And in that tiny negotiation, like, use that as a model for your bigger business negotiations.
Absolutely. And I think practicing negotiation is something that we do kind of subconsciously, like you mentioned. I think we all negotiate all day, every day.
Right.
Compromises are sort of at the heart of living in a society. And I think very often we, especially women, I think don't necessarily own the fact that we're so good at negotiation. And the minute we're put in a more formal environment, we're like, oh, we don't negotiate as well, or I don't know how to do that. But in fact, you're doing it all day, every day. I think that's a really, really good note. So what gets in the way of a good negotiation?
Yeah, I mean, one big one, and especially if you're thinking about getting a job or asking for different terms from your employer, is bringing your personal situation into it. Okay, of course, sometimes your personal situation is super relevant, but say you go in to ask for a raise and it's because you took on more expenses in your personal life. Sorry, that's not your employer's fault. You need to make it about the facts, right? This is what people are making in this area. This is what I've contributed to the company. This is how I've helped the company make more money. This is my average sales. This is how I upsell, bring things that benefit the company. So again, that's making it a win-win. If you are getting your raise or your better terms based on something that's benefiting them, they're going to be not feel like you're taking something away from them and you're in opposition, right? It's again about being on the same team with the same common goal, which is to make the business successful.
Absolutely. And I think also knowing who you're talking to is incredibly important. I think very often we walk into negotiations thinking things are kind of black and white, when reality is we all kind of live in this gray area. And if you understand you have to understand what the goals are of the person that you're negotiating with before you can even walk in that room if you want to be successful, or at least have a fairly good idea, because you need to get to that common ground. To your point, to get to that common ground, you have to have a pretty good idea of what success looks like to both of you. So I always like before, and I'm on sales calls probably 5 hours a day, every day of my life, right? And I can tell you before every call, I take a moment and think, what is a win for the person that I'm talking to? And how do I model what I'm doing to fit into what looks like a win for them? How do we get to that win together? And if you can come up with that strategy beforehand and present that strategy in a convincing way, I think you're going to have yourself a pretty easy time with that negotiation because you've already done all the work.
I love that. That's such a good tip. I love that. And here's the theme, right? Taking a pause before you
Right.
take or make a decision. It's always a good idea. And I'm sure somebody out there is thinking like, well, what if I don't know what matters to them? In a way, even better, because people like being listened to. So if you start with questions and you get the other party to do the talking, you're almost always going to come out ahead, because people like being heard. And so if you ask real questions and you let them do the talking, then you'll know what's important to them. And then you can build your argument or your case off of that.
Absolutely. I always like to go, if I'm talking to, let's say, a brand about participating in one of our events, I like to go to their Instagram. I like to go to their website. I like to go to all of the different places where I can see what their drink strategy looks like, what their marketing strategy looks like. It takes 10 minutes to peruse all of these different places and get a sense for what that looks like. But I don't go in there and say, oh, I see that you do A, B, or C, because that's really presumptuous. I like to start the conversation by saying, knowing that A, B, and C are kind of in the back of my mind, and I've been thinking of ways to fit our goals into those ideas. But I always start with, well, tell me a little bit about what your goals are for the year. And let's see if we can't find a way to make our projects work within your goals. And then you get a really great sense of what the other person is thinking. And of course, for a lot of folks who are on this call, that's maybe not a direct example, but it certainly could be applied to an employer, to a contract that you're putting in place. You're going out and consulting. It's the same idea, right? You're going to go consult with a restaurant group. Like they want you to put a proposal in. Go find out what you can about them. Go check out what their restaurants are doing. Go see what the menu looks like. See how you can add value. But then when you get into that conversation, ask them what they want those goals to be, because they're bringing you in. So clearly the menu they currently have isn't the one that they want. So it's good to have the context of where they've been, but also find out where they want to go, because you're the conduit to get them to where they want to go, hopefully.
Yeah. And there's a balance of confidence and humility there, right?
Right.
Because you might have some really great ideas based on your research, but don't assume they haven't thought of those before, because you'll
Right.
never know all the different factors. So I will say, when I was an employee, I was probably a very difficult employee. Shout out to my former bosses that had to put up with me, because I would be like, we should be doing things this way. And I was right, but I only had some of the information, right? Like I didn't have the perspective of all the other departments at the company or the other considerations of an owner. And so, you know, my ideas were good in the vacuum that I existed in. And so asking what people's goals are is really useful. You know, at the end of a meeting, I'll ask my clients, like, how can I make your life easier this week? And they almost never ask for anything, but it's that moment of them kind of laughing and kind of relaxing a little bit that like leaves it on a high note. Or that amazing job interview question that I think a lot of you already know is, you know, like, how can I help you? You ask the interviewer, how can I help you look good to your boss? Or how can I help you make your job easier? And just being there to kind of be in service is really strong.
Absolutely. Well, let's stick with job interviews for a minute. So many folks are out there going out and getting their next job. You know, a lot of folks left what they were doing before. They're moving into new careers or new aspects of the hospitality industry. When you're on a job interview, what are a few tips that you have that somebody can walk in with a lot of confidence for their interviews?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, know what makes you uniquely special, right? It's everyone has their thing, you know, what that makes them good with customers, that makes them really good at the skill of the job. Like, what are, you know, 2 or 3 factors that make you like uniquely awesome, that would make you different from the other people applying, as well as the base skill set. You don't have to have 100% of the skills in the job listing necessarily, if you can make a good case for why you have one special thing they can't get from everybody else. So that can really help you rise above the competition. I think the other thing is, you should almost always, like 98% of the time, negotiate your money, right? When you're talking about accepting a job. And I want to kind of scare you into it. Like, go do the math in advance of like, if I'm making $1,000 a week versus $1,500 a week, or that might be a bad example, but even making $100 more a week and being able to put $50 in savings for the next year, and how much that would compound over the next 20 years. Like, if you don't ask the difficult question in this moment, you will be sacrificing, you know, $50,000 to your later self. So it might feel like $50 difference right now, but like, because of interest and compounding and saving, like, you are ripping your future self off from like tens of thousands of dollars potentially. I didn't do the math on that example, so mathematicians out there, please check it. But the point is,
The
like,
idea is there.
yeah, and you're not just ripping yourself off financially, you're ripping yourself off emotionally if you're going to be stressed about money or terms or your schedule or anything like that. And I know as a boss, I always list positions or opportunities not at the top of what I can do, at the bottom of what I can do, because I expect people to negotiate, right? Or you know, I need some room for that. You know, bosses are not trying to go out there and pay the most possible. Like, that's not how capitalism works, right? And so it is a negotiation. And if you do it respectfully, we're on the same team,
Right.
you know, it's how you ask. And to your point earlier, you know, like, how do you go into it? You know, you match the formality of the situation. You don't need to go in there with like a typewritten bullet point thing, but with some people you do.
Totally. So I think the question that a lot of folks are going to have is, how do I broach the topic of money, benefits, all of that in an interview in a way that is respectful?
Yeah. Well, there's different laws in different states now about whether you can disclose your past salaries. I don't think that that's a thing anymore, thank goodness. But you can ask. I would ask, what is the range for this job? And ask, you know, what are the factors that put you at the top of the range? What are they looking for? So they might say experience, and you could, if you don't have the exact experience, I still think you can make a case for why your unique experience adds up to a lot of experience, right? Again, it's
Absolutely.
like what sets you apart for sure.
I know as a person who hires quite often,
Yeah.
I see it as a red flag when somebody doesn't want to talk about money and doesn't want to talk about the specifics of the role right up front. And maybe that's just a me thing, but when we're having those conversations, if somebody doesn't want to talk about money and doesn't want to talk about what the specific roles and responsibilities are going to be, I'm like, there's something there isn't exactly right. We need to have that conversation. I need to find out why. And oftentimes it's because of social expectations and people feeling like it's presumptuous to talk about those things on a first meeting. But we're discussing a job. And I think it's really important to remember when you are going in for a job, you are there, your labor is to be compensated. Like there has to be that push and pull. And if you're not having those conversations right off the bat, you're going to be the one who loses out. So definitely get in there. And I know it's hard. And I hear y'all, I feel y'all. It's hard to have those conversations. But make sure you're having them, and make sure you're having them very early, because otherwise it's very likely that you're wasting your time, and you're wasting the time of the person who you're talking to, because that might not be the right fit all around. So the more you can bring those things up, I think the better.
Yeah, if you're way off in the amounts, don't do the second interview, like don't waste their time either.
It's not good for anybody, especially not you, because you're the minute you hear too low, then you feel disrespected because it doesn't match what your expectations are. So there's no need to pursue it. And that's why it's so important, I think, to have those conversations kind of off the bat. So let's say you're going in for a job and you're not exactly sure how much you should be making. Like, how much you'd like to be making, but you're not sure how much you should be making. Do you have any tips on how to sort of figure out what that number should be, or how to get there with an employer to find out what they think it should be?
Absolutely. Thank God for the internet, as in most cases. There's Glassdoor, which is the awesome site that people self-report what they made in different positions. So it may not be the exact company you're talking to, but you can see similar ones, and you can see it in the region, right? So like what a head of brand would be making in New York is not the same as what a head of brand will be making in Kansas City, but you can check it against geographic as well as the same role in the same type of company in different places. And so that's one thing. The other thing is, like, please have friends in your industry that you can talk to about money and ask, like, what should I be charging for this?
Absolutely.
A lot of times if you're somebody who habitually undercharges or under earns, you're going to have to just start a formula where you just, any number you think, you add 20% to it or something. Like, you just have to practice it till you get more comfortable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the big game changer for me among others, because believe me, I've had to work on this. I was not born with these skills. I have worked on it over many years. But one of the big game changers is my company Pregame. Now we do a lot of work of government contracts. And so all of that is public record. And so, I was like, if anyone through the Freedom of Information Act can see how much I'm making on this project, I better be charging like appropriately in an on-brand way. So, that'll
Absolutely.
grass for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that transparency and being able to share those numbers, I know that a lot of us on the event side share those numbers pretty freely with one another, so that we can make sure that we're kind of keeping the market rate where it should be. And I know that a lot of folks in our industry like to share that information, but I think sometimes it gets kind of, how do I put this? I think very often that information is gate kept from a lot of people, and all I can say is there are a lot of people out there who want to share that information with you. They want to have that free flow of information about how much they're getting paid for specific projects, how much they're getting paid for specific roles, and just keep asking until you find folks who want to share that with you. And those are your people. Keep sharing. All of you should keep sharing.
I want to add too that, mindset is so much of this, right? Like going in, we're on the same team. the employer wants to find a great person to hire. They're not out to get you. But I think a lot of people who've never been a boss kind of assume this victim mentality of like, oh, capitalism is like we all exist in it. We all know it has problems. And like, let's learn how to play the game better so we can win it, right? So, just get rid of any victim mentality or barter mentality. Like, take responsibility for asking those questions. Take responsibility for writing down and knowing your budget and knowing how much you need to make minimum and how much you want to make ideally, and landing in between those two numbers. Like, take responsibility for doing a little bit of research. Take responsibility for getting the courage, whatever you have to do, to ask those questions in the interview, and to like make that appointment when it's time for you to get better terms when you're already in a role. Along with that is, if you're volunteering, it's still negotiable, right? So I volunteer my time with my professional skills. So you might, maybe you are a volunteer bartender at like a charitable event. The other party just might not know. They might not know how much you should make, or it might be easy for somebody to ask for a donation of your liquor brand for their fundraiser or something like that. It's your job to educate them on the value of what your donation is. And then it's absolutely acceptable to ask for a return in that value in kind, right? Some sort of barter agreement. So it could be, this donation of this wine is worth $2,000. So can we get like this equation of $2,000 in marketing exposure to your audience, which could be branded signage, being included in the press release, being in the newsletter. Same thing. I do periodic volunteering as an event MC. And so, it's my job to educate the event producers on like, this is what I would charge if you were paying me as an event MC. And so this is kind of the exposure equivalent, or I want to get the photo and video from the event within this many days, like having a writer that specifies all of that.
Cutting right to the core of what you're saying, having everything written down and having everything clearly communicated between both parties is at the heart of a successful negotiation, right? I think very often in our business, up until recently, traditionally, it was a lot of handshake deals, a lot of under the table deals. And increasingly we found out that doesn't work, and that usually benefits whoever the wealthier party is, and doesn't really benefit the person who's in there trying to do the negotiating. So I think at the heart of what you're saying here is get it in writing. How do you do that? How do you build a document like that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have templates because I'm lucky because, I used to work for an awesome event company and handled some of those barter donations with liquor brands and with the distributors. And so, I have templates on that, but, the basic elements of that could be used for you as an individual doing a volunteer or a charitable event, or for a brand. And so what it looks like is like, keep it simple, first of all. Like if you needed a legal one because it's a big enough donation, but if you're a sponsor or a partner of some level, keep it simple, type it up. It's, the details of the event. This is the event, the day, and then, here is the thing you're providing, and you can just bullet it out, like 3 hours of bartending time, like 2 hours of setup. Quantify everything. Is it 3 meetings ahead of time for what you're going to be planning on? Is it, that's all your time, that's worth money. So quantify everything. And then in return, the other party promises to do X, Y, and Z. If you assume any of those things and you don't put them in writing, then if it goes wrong or you don't get what you expect because the other party didn't know what you were expecting, again, no victim mentality. That was on you for not bringing it up.
Absolutely. I think communication is, the communication is at the heart of every relationship, whether it be business, personal. Being a clear communicator and having everything that's in your head and in your heart written down so the other person can see it, I think is incredibly important, especially in a business environment. And it's also important to consider that there are a lot of folks out there who are maybe poor auditory learners. I'm one. There are folks who maybe don't hear things as well as they can read them. So trying to consider different people's style of communication, and also kind of factoring in, there are a lot of folks out there, especially in our industry, who are neurodivergent, trying to find ways that you can communicate that the other person is going to get that information. I feel like that is just like the most important thing, because very often I think we think that speaking about something is enough and will get us to that place where we're really happy with the final outcome. And in my experience, in 17 years of doing this, I can say that if it's not written down, it probably isn't going to turn out the way that you want it to. And even if it is written down, it probably still won't turn out exactly the way that you thought it would. But it's a much better safeguard than if it isn't written down. So I think that's a really good tip. And certainly, if any of you out there ever need help writing a document like that, I am always down to help and show you how I do it. I'm always down to help and show you how much we charge for things. None of that's a secret. You can download our decks on all of our websites. We try to keep everything as transparent around here as possible, because the only way that we can make sure everybody gets paid fairly is to know what everyone else is getting paid as well, what everybody else is getting out of the deal as well. Okay, so let's go back to your very smart outline, which I have just completely derailed us, and I apologize for. Okay. So the next thing on your list is one that I think we all struggle with, and hopefully less and less so. But imposter syndrome. When you're walking into a room, you feel like you don't belong. How do you get past that? How do you defeat the imposter syndrome that we all have?
Well, definitely personalize your own trick for this, and whatever works for you is what works, right? Probably don't be an asshole, and probably don't, like, become inebriated in order to have difficult conversations. So you're going to have to like trick your brain into making it easier a different way. So, some of the tools I use, first of all, I love the author and memoirist, Augustine Burroughs, says that confidence is just being present. And so the more you can be in the present moment, like, that is confidence. You don't have to like be confident or learn how to be confident. Just substitute that with presence. Because if you're tuned into what you're doing, you'll appear confident. So I love that so much. One of the most helpful tools for me is just knowing that everyone experiences imposter syndrome. So it's kind of like, if we all have it, then no one has it, And so like,
right.
even A-list movie stars experience imposter syndrome. So like, it's not a thing in a way. For me, it's also a huge matter of equality. So, as a woman and as a feminist, I know that men are more comfortable and historically get paid more, and I'm not okay with that. And so I'm going to be part of the solution and part of the change. And it's really important to me that I am being paid as much or more as my male counterparts, especially when I'm better than they are at what they do. And so I am going to do that not just for me, but on behalf of all women, so that I can pave a road where we're all getting paid more. As a person of color, same thing, right? Like, it's that much more important to me, because we're setting a standard that affects the rest of our community. So not that any woman or any person of color has to carry everyone else on their backs, but I do think, especially like when women make themselves smaller, you're doing a disservice to all other women. So step up, negotiate.
Absolutely. And that's hard. I'm right there. I feel it. Yeah, I've been in these rooms, like I said, for 17 years, and I still very often feel like I don't belong. And I think part of it is you're made to feel that way, right? Like, I feel like very often I walk into a room and there's a certain subgroup who feel like you and I don't belong because we're women, and maybe especially feel like you don't belong because you're a woman of color. Mm-hmm. And you got to look at it, at least for me, the way I look at it is, I spend so much of my time trying to defeat people that in other aspects of my life, I'm not going to let them beat me in the boardroom. I'm not going to let them beat me in those environments, because like you said, I feel like it is my responsibility to all of the other women in the hospitality industry to say, hey, you have to pay me for that. I can't do that for free. You've got to pay us for our time and for our work. And it's incredibly difficult to do in many, many settings. But I do find that it's incredibly valuable. And when you do step up and say, hey, I deserve to be paid for this, I find that people do very often kind of change their attitude and say, you're right. It isn't fair for me to just take your labor for free. I think a lot of times it is just about putting your hand up and saying, no, this doesn't work for me. You've got to come up with a better way. So I love that you said that. I think that's the right way to think about it. Just get in there and speak for all of us.
Yeah. And you don't have to go in there defensively and be like, on behalf of all women everywhere, like, or
right.
into like they are being oppressive just because they're trying to get a good deal. Like, don't take it to that level. But, we all know that person from probably from a privileged culture background who doesn't deserve to be at the level they're at and has all this confidence just because they've never known not to. Channel that energy and be like,
right.
Bless you. Thank you for giving me that example. And I'm going to channel Chad's energy when I go into this meeting, and I'm gonna
exactly right. I love it. So let's talk a little bit about making situations win-wins. It's something that you've brought up a couple of times. Tell us the best strategy for getting to that place of both parties winning.
Yeah. So first of all, I think the writing it down that you talked about, and I love that you brought it up, that we've all processed things a little bit differently. So some people can talk something out. You don't always want to talk through your whole thought process in that negotiation meeting. And so you might want to talk it out with a friend and then pull out just the pertinent points. Or you might want to write it out. I'm somebody who I need to see it in print because you talked about neurodiversity too. My brain makes things much more complex than they need to be. So sometimes I'll skip steps when I'm explaining it to someone else. I'll do step 1, 2, and then 6. So writing it down makes it a lot more clear for everybody. So being prepared with what you need and what you want is great. But then the next part, of course, is finding out what the other party wants, not with assumptions, but by asking questions. And try to make the connection of what you want and why that benefits them, right? So it could be as simple as saying, at this salary, I will really be dedicated to, staying with the company for a long time. Or, if we start out here, then I'm really going to jump in. Find a nicer way to say it, but you can.
That's valid though. I think that's as a person who hires people, if somebody says to me, if I had $5,000 more in my annual salary, I'm confident I could stay in this role for 2 or 3 more years. That would be amazing. I'd be like, okay, let's consider that. Right. And I think that's a really good point. And again, it's all back to communication, right?
Yeah. I usually use contractors for a lot of my projects. And so when I'm building a consulting team, I will ask the contractor, I'm just like, because I'm negotiating on their behalf. So I will say, what is the minimum amount you need to make on this? And what amount makes you jump out of bed and super excited to work on this? And I will do my best to get you that amount, but I need to know your boundaries. So that's how I approach it for myself too.
Love that. I love that. I think that's really smart. And I like that idea of setting those boundaries for you mentally before you walk into the job interview or before you walk into the negotiation to know, okay, so this is the least I can do, but here's really where here's where I'd love to be. And then finding that middle ground where everybody's comfortable. And maybe there's not even middle ground. Maybe your amazing jump right out of bed, so excited every day is exactly where the employer wants to be. But knowing those numbers in your head and knowing where you want to be before you start the negotiation, I think is incredibly important. I know that very often I will be talking to potential candidates and I'll ask them directly, well, what is your salary? What would you like your salary to be? And I don't know. I've heard that, which I want to make sure that I'm able to meet that. I don't want to just land on a number and that not be enough. I haven't lived in California in a really long time. It might be more expensive to live there. It is more expensive to live there than here in Kentucky. it's really helpful to kind of have those numbers and those parameters in your head so that you can get to that place where you are going to be successful and happy. Because if you land on a number that you're maybe going to be happy with, but you're not sure, but then a year down the line, you're like, oh, that wasn't enough. I didn't ask for enough. Then everybody's kind of in a bad spot because it's been budgeted for and all that. So I like the idea of getting in there with those boundaries. Outside of financial boundaries. Oh, please.
Yeah, one last thing, and this is kind of like the, master level of negotiation, but if in asking all of your wise questions, you have found out what they're worried about or the problems they have that they don't know how to solve or that they're working on solving, if your negotiation needs can be a solution to their problem in some way, that is a huge leverage that you have. So it could be something like, if they say, this is the amount we have because, like I have to work extra hours because the back bar is a total mess. And you say like, I'm totally willing to take on organizing that as part of my, as part of my duties and like add that bullet point to my responsibilities. Yeah. And then you've solved that problem for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that also proves that you are listening, which, as you brought up at the beginning, that conversation, listening to what the other party wants and then finding the solution to their problem is kind of the key to negotiation, and that the key to a successful win-win negotiation, right? Not just a negotiation where you steamroll somebody, because that's also a possibility. We're mostly talking about the win-win situations around here. Okay, so we've talked a lot about what to do. Tell me a little bit about what you would think is like a definite do not do in a negotiation.
This is I just don't know why someone would do that. I think it's so risky, and I know not everyone agrees with me on this, but I just don't think you ever bring your personal life into the reasons that somebody owes you something. And yes, we want to bring our whole selves to work, or our whole professional selves to work. And yes, we want to be ourselves and things, but like, it's not the other party didn't have a hand in making the decisions you made in your personal life, your bills, your rent, your student loans, whether you have kids, like none of that is their fault. None of that was their choice. And so keep it in the realm of facts and reasons why, this is a fair question to ask, fair for everybody.
Right, because while all of those factors are incredibly important and are things that you should consider as you're putting together your budget and how much you're going to ask for, all of that is super important on your end mentally to think through. They're just going to use that as ammo. The other negotiator is going to use that as a reason to not give you what you're worth, because you certainly are worth every single dollar that you think you are. So I think that's a very good point. I would also say that in the like do not category, I'm a big believer in, and maybe this is not the case for everybody, but I'm a big believer in not really saying negative things about other folks, whether they be other candidates up for the job or other businesses in that area. I find that doesn't usually work out as well as just going in with sort of a more positive attitude. Certainly if there's like a specific situation or a specific thing that needs to be addressed, that this is not a blanket for everything, but sort of generally, if you know somebody else is up for the job, I just would not recommend coming in and saying that person's stuck or they don't work hard or whatever. That's just a very bad way to negotiate. It's a very good way to make an enemy. It's a very bad way to negotiate a better salary for yourself. Are there any other tips that you have? Any other things to avoid?
Well, I will say with that, know yourself, know how good you are at being shady, right? Because I will, when I'm negotiating, or kind of more selling, myself to a client, I will say, other consultants make this really complicated. I won't point out specific consulting firms or consultants, but I'll say, other consultants make this really complicated. And I don't think it has to be that complicated. I just think we serve people better when we explain this plainly and make it accessible for everyone. And they'll be like, yeah, totally. And from then on, they'll perceive all the other consultants as too complicated. So I'm like planting a seed for them in terms of like what makes working with me or my company better.
Right.
So, that's like advanced level skills.
Absolutely.
So make sure you know where you're at,
Right.
but you can practice.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, speaking of the advanced examples, you've got a list of pro tips in here that I think are amazing to share. Do you want to share these pro tips you have on negotiation here at the end?
Of course. Well, here's the first one is, I mentioned earlier knowing the range. So I call it your deal and your ideal. So know what your deal is, like your walk away, your minimum, but also know your ideal, because you might end up with your ideal, but probably there's a range between there. So for instance, with a job, that can be salary, but that also can be paid time off. It can be benefits. It can be what shifts you're working. It could be whether you're working from home or working in person. Like there's a lot of things that are up for negotiation as part of your package. So if you are pitching something for someone to buy from you, you can have 2 options or even 3 options. So if you're pitching something to a brand, for example, you could have like the full VIP option that's like everything they could possibly get from you. And then you could have maybe something that's the bare minimum, and then something in the middle, that's the thing you actually want to do. So sometimes having that big VIP option is just to have something really expensive and extra, so that the middle option thing you really want to do looks like a great deal. So there's a little psychology in that. But going in with options can be good, but no more than 3, because too many options confuses people. Yeah, the other thing would be just kind of selling like long-term value, right? This is a relationship investment. I think a lot of us are used to selling like our time for money, and the skill or the real thing that you're selling them and how much it's going to benefit them over time is how you should be selling. So I could come in and consult and give you advice for an hour. And if, whatever I charge per hour could be the fee. But if I'm telling you how to double your business next year in that hour, I should be charging way more, because the value of that advice to you is going to be worth way more than what I would charge per hour, right? So think about the value or the return on the investment over that. And like I said before, let the other party talk, ask more questions than you are giving answers, because you don't want to make assumptions. But, bringing them facts, bringing them depersonalized information, other than what makes you special and unique is a really wise way to negotiate. And, do your research, comparison shop, especially if you are being negotiated with and the other party is a vendor. Make sure you know what other people are charging, what their terms are, so that you know if you're getting a good deal.
Absolutely. To your point on return on investment looks like a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And sometimes even the same company will have a different ROI that they're looking for year over year. We have so many examples where we're like, if you sponsor a cabin and camp, we know that you'll probably get at least 3 or 4 menu placements afterwards. That's the average. And some people are like, whoa, that's amazing, because that means I'm going to give you 2,000 monies, and back we're going to get probably like 15,000 monies. That's crazy. That's amazing. For some folks, that's just not hitting the goal. That's not what they don't care if they're getting the menu placement. What they care about is taking their marketing idea that year and making sure that it comes to life in the right way. And maybe that's the right move. Maybe it's not the right move, and those dollars don't matter. So listening to folks, having that conversation, saying, okay, so what does return on investment look like to you? Because it's not, the obvious answer is financial, right? But financial isn't always the end game for whoever you're working with. So it's really good to have that conversation up front, so okay, are we after bringing to life this exact replica of this beautiful marketing idea, or is return on investment financial? Is this return on investment contact list? What is it that we're after here together? Because it's different, and it's different in every situation, which I think brings back your point of listening, which I feel like we've said in every one of these, every single one of these little subsections.
Yeah, that's really good advice. The other thing is, I totally lost what the other thing is, but you made me think of something, which was, oh, we gave you so much information today. And I know some of the things that we said are really obvious and some things seem really intimidating. And if you go into your next negotiation, not like this is the only negotiation you're ever going to have for the rest of your life, but just pick one of these things to practice. Like this time I'm going to write down what I want before I go into it. Or this time I'm just going to practice asking more questions. That's going to make this whole thing easier because I've been negotiating for 20 years. Like I'm better at it now than I was 10 years ago. I'll be better at it in 10 years. So you have to pick some skills to practice and you'll keep getting better at it, guaranteed.
Absolutely. I was just popping into our chat here to see, we had 2 notifications. I want to just put it out there to the crew. Does anyone have a question? Actually, it looks like there's a little Q&A button that I'm popping open right now. I've got a question for you from Tony. Thank you, Tony. Do you prefer to end meetings with the negotiation complete, or do you like to leave it more open-ended and kind of follow up?
It depends on several things. I would err on the side of not completing the negotiation in the meeting so that you don't just do a knee-jerk yes because you want to be over and you're uncomfortable. I think you could say, you know, that sounds like it could work. Let me go look at a couple things and get back to you by tomorrow. I think having some phrase you're ready to pull like that is just going to be better because then you get out of the heat of the moment and you can think clearly. You know, if I just don't have time, you know, maybe I'll shut it down in that moment, but usually there's something written to do after that. So it's not completely done. I think it, as in all things, it depends on the situation, but I would err on the side of not being totally complete and verbally agreed before you have time to go away and really think about it out of the space of the negotiation.
I personal preference and what I really like to do. Oh, absolutely. What I really like to do is after having the conversation, having that initial negotiation, I say, I'm going to go back and recap every single thing we just talked about. I'm going to send you an email with all of the details, including some of the details maybe we didn't go over in that initial negotiation. Because like talking about who the photographer is going to be is maybe not top of mind in a 30-minute, hour-long conversation, right? Like there are certain things that are little details that we've already thought through, but that maybe aren't like the most important thing for the overall conversation while we're negotiating. So I put all of that down in an email. It's all written down. And then I say, here are your options. I'm right there with you on the multiple options. I love a 2 to 3 option situation. And then from there, you have everything written down and everyone knows, okay, so if I pick option 1, I need to get the buses and they are going to do everything else. If I pick option 2, I don't have to do anything. Love not doing anything. And then option 3, I have to do everything. Okay, so which one am I going to pick? And that way it's super clear, everything's in writing, and everyone has that reference point. I think if we decide it all 100% in the meeting without having those details written down, you're going to miss out on some of the really key facts, at least in my experience. But again, I have ADHD, so it could just be that my brain can't do it in a conversation, and I
love that you're personalizing your style to provide for that. Right? We all have a thing or like something we're nervous about. So you can absolutely tailor your style to match your personality or anything else. I was coaching a business owner this morning, and she's in a negotiation for, you know, a big contract with her top client that she's been with for 10 years, and they want to cut out this big program. And she was just kind of annoyed because she didn't think that the executives had their employees' best interests at heart. And I said, you know what, like, even though they're kind of leaning away from it, I think you should go in one last time and have the information and just, you know, say, even if it's just for the record and they're going to drop that program, I think you should go in there and say, listen, you know, just for the record, I want you all to know, like, these are the results. This is the satisfaction. Like, if you take this away, you guys told me you're struggling with employee recruitment and retention. If you retain just 2 people from this program staying in place, you've paid for the program. You know, like there's other ways you can characterize it and go back even if they're leaning away from something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And those subsequent conversations I find are usually where you find the true value in the deal on both sides, because a lot of those details just can't get covered in initial conversations. Do we have any other questions, friends? The questions in the Q&A section are answered. I don't think we have anything else in the chat. Ciara, I just want to thank you so much for being here today. Your time is so valuable for all of us, and we love getting to listen to you talk. Honestly, it's so inspiring for me as a person who knows they are not a great negotiator. I'm a pushover in all aspects of life. Hearing this from you is so helpful and inspires me so much to get out there and negotiate for what I'm worth, and to encourage all my friends out there to do the same. So thank you so much for the time. And thank you so much to Brown Forman for supporting this amazing program, and to Tales of the Cocktail, as always, for doing such great work and making sure our community has access to incredible people like Ciara. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I think, Megan, if you need anything else, we will see you all soon. I'm double checking that I'm not missing anything here. No, I think we got it all. Thank you all so much for being here. We'll see you soon.